If higher education is facing, a collapsing value proposition, soaring debt, and this huge push toward alternatives, why does the traditional college system stubbornly persist?
It's the big question, isn't it?
It is. I mean, we're talking about institutions that are running multi-million-dollar deficits, parents questioning the sheer expense, and a massive demographic pressure wave that's about to crash down on admissions offices.
And yet here we are. The doors are still open.
Exactly. It's the multi-trillion-dollar paradox of
Yeah.
the 21st century, and today we're going to try and unravel that exact problem.
Well, we hear the doom and gloom constantly. Colleges closing their doors, student debt hitting, these unbelievable highs, and high school grads are openly questioning if a four-year degree is even necessary anymore.
Right.
But the core institution of higher education isn't imploding. Not yet, anyway. What we're actually witnessing is a massive and, frankly, painful structural shift. And that system is desperately trying to adapt to survive.
That structural inertia you mentioned is just incredibly powerful. College is still this deeply entrenched cultural script, a financial and social rite of passage.
It's the symbolic transition.
Yeah, into both adulthood and, I guess, economic legitimacy.
Yeah.
So if that system, which has been the default for generations, fractures really quickly, the stakes are genuinely seismic.
Oh, absolutely.
I mean, think about the domino effect. It would fracture career pipelines, destabilize the local economies that are totally tied to these universities, and it would force a total radical reevaluation of how our society validates success, knowledge, and even just basic competency.
And that's exactly why we need this deep dive today. We're going to try and cut through all the generalized anxiety and look directly at the most recent data.
Okay, so what are we working with?
We've got data drawn from 2025 activity and some very clear cold projections for 2026. And we're going to use it to identify the financial, demographic, and policy pillars that are either holding this whole engine up or pushing it to a critical, maybe irreversible tipping point.
So our mission today is to figure out, with specifics, what is truly keeping the lights on in academia, and maybe more importantly, who really benefits from that persistence.
Exactly. And to understand the system's persistence, we first have to grapple with the crisis of confidence it's facing.
Right.
The public perception of college value has hit a historical low, and that's not just based on, anecdotal fear. It's quantifiable, measurable data that reflects a loss of trust that has really been decades in the making.
Okay, so let's unpack the hard numbers behind that skepticism. We've seen Americans placing significantly less importance on a college degree over, the last decade and a half?
It's a reversal of a trend that dominated the entire post-war era.
A huge reversal.
That's right. As of August 2025, less than 2/5 of Americans, we're talking only 35%, now rate a college degree as very important.
Just 35%. And what was that number before?
Well, compare that to just 10 years ago, back in 2015, that number was 57%. So that's a 22-point drop in a single decade. It's staggering. It reflects a fundamental reassessment of the entire value proposition of college.
And what's really telling about that drop is that it's being observed across both major political parties. This isn't just a partisan talking point or some momentary political squabble.
No, it suggests a broad systemic issue, a deep problem with trust in the institution itself.
And while a solid majority, around 40%, still says it's fairly important, the sheer decline in the people who see it as essential shows that that cultural script we talked about is finally starting to fray.
And this skepticism isn't based on just one single thing. When you really dig into the drivers for this deteriorating value perception, it's a perfect storm of financial pain and, frankly, academic misalignment.
It's a whole laundry list of existential threats, isn't it? So what are the primary objective reasons people are turning away?
The top complaints are still the high cost and the crippling burden of student debt. That's no surprise.
They're inextricably linked.
They are, and they affect the decision-making process right from the get-go. But following very closely behind those financial complaints are institutional failures. Specifically, the perceived failure to focus instruction on practical career and job skills.
So people feel like they're paying six figures for theoretical knowledge that doesn't immediately translate to a better paycheck.
That's the feeling. Exactly.
And then you have the cultural critique mixed in, which is what really drives the political discussion. The desire to eliminate political bias from the classroom is something we see cited frequently by concerned parents and students, which suggests that for a lot of people, The college experience itself is perceived as, I don't know, alienating or just not aligned with their core values.
And that just adds another layer of risk to an already speculative investment.
Right.
And at the same time, you have the market aggressively disrupting the perceived necessity of the degree itself.
Which is a huge shift.
It is. Why commit 4 years and 6 figures when you have faster, cheaper, and more specialized paths opening up every day? We're seeing growing mainstream attention on trade schools, on specialized micro-credentials, rigorous online learning platforms,
And of course, AI.
and of course, the huge disruptive potential of AI in the workforce, which threatens to automate many of the routine cognitive tasks that a basic bachelor's degree used to be the ticket for.
The debt dilemma really makes all this skepticism concrete, though. If you look at the data on perceived worth, it just shows how toxic debt is to the whole equation.
It fundamentally changes the risk calculation. A study by Education Dynamics found that roughly 47% of Americans view a college degree as worthwhile if it's financed entirely without loans.
Okay, 47%. That's still less than half, but it's a solid number.
It is. But here's the dramatic drop. That view plummets to a mere 22%, less than a quarter of the population, the moment loans are involved.
22%. That is a collapse.
It's an absolute collapse. And that contrast demonstrates that debt isn't just a cost factor. It's an emotional and financial barrier that transforms what was once seen as a solid investment into what many now perceive as a highly speculative gamble.
So if subjective confidence is dropping off a cliff, we have to look at the objective data to see if that widespread skepticism is actually justified by the financial numbers. And this is where it gets really interesting, because the data suggests that college is still, on average, a good bet.
Right.
But we have to be really, really careful about what we mean by average.
That's the key distinction, isn't it? The word average is doing a tremendous amount of heavy lifting in that sentence. The headline data point that institutions love to hold on to is that the median bachelor's degree program has a completion-adjusted return on investment, or ROI, of nearly $160,000 in increased lifetime earnings.
Okay, 160,000. That's a pretty compelling number.
It is. And even more reassuring, about 70% of all undergraduate programs yield a positive ROI. So that means, 3 out of 4 times you will earn more with the degree than you would have without it.
And when you put that $160,000 median ROI up against other forms of investment, it looks surprisingly robust.
It does. Investing in higher education, on average, yields about a 12.5% annual return.
And the stock market's historical average is what, 7%?
Closer to 7%, yeah. So a college degree, managed wisely, still remains one of the best financial investments you can make. It sounds almost guaranteed.
It does, but you said managed wisely, and that's where the nuance comes in.
That's where all the nuance is. That strong average is heavily propped up by high performers, and the crucial caveat is that the ROI is highly dependent on the major you choose. In fact, your field of study explains more of the variation in ROI than the actual college you choose to attend.
So it's less about Harvard versus State U and more about engineering versus art history.
Precisely. This is the detail that the public perception so often misses or ignores, and that's what leads to so much disappointment.
Okay, so we have to look past the median and get into the weeds.
Yeah.
What are the high-paying, high ROI fields that are disproportionately propping up that $160,000 number?
Unsurprisingly, it's STEM and career-focused fields that dominate. We're talking about degrees in engineering, computer science, nursing, and economics.
The usual suspects?
The usual suspects. These are the majors that almost guarantee a massive net boost in lifetime earnings, often exceeding that median by a huge margin. Conversely, students choosing more traditional liberal arts majors like the arts, education, psychology, they are far less likely to enjoy a net boost.
And for many of those degrees, especially in the humanities and fine arts, graduates are facing distressingly high rates of underemployment, right?
Very high, meaning they're working jobs a year out of college that don't actually require a 4-year degree.
Which makes the degree less of an investment and more of an expensive luxury item for a growing number of people. But the risks don't stop at the bachelor's level, do they? We see what we might call a credential cliff, hitting 2 specific opposite ends of the educational spectrum.
That's right, subbaccalaureate and graduate degrees. The system is kind of failing at both the entry and the exit points.
So that's where the risk is most concentrated.
It is, and the numbers here are frankly terrifying. Take 2-year degrees and other subbaccalaureate credentials. 43% of these programs have a negative ROI.
43%. So it's almost a coin flip.
It's a coin flip, but the numbers become truly devastating when you introduce that completion-adjusted metric again.
Okay, wait, walk us through that completion-adjusted number again, because it feels like the heart of the risk equation, especially for these programs which have such high dropout rates.
Certainly. If you assume a student actually completes their sub-baccalaureate program, the ROI can look decent, maybe around $170,000 in increased lifetime earnings.
Okay, that's not bad.
But we know completion rates at community colleges and other less than four-year schools are notoriously low. So when you adjust the expected ROI for the entire cohort, factoring in all the students who started the program but didn't finish, the expected ROI for the median program drops drastically.
Oh, drastically.
It crashes from $170,000 down to just $18,000 overall.
18,000? That's nothing over a lifetime.
It's a rounding error. Non-completion is financially catastrophic for the individual.
And what about the person who took out loans but has no degree to show for it? That just seems like the absolute worst of both worlds.
It is the ultimate financial penalty. For a dropout who attends the median bachelor's program, the estimated ROI is a negative $99,000.
Negative 99,000.
Yes. They have the debt, they have no degree credential, and they've lost years of labor market experience and income. This is why college is perceived as such a highly speculative gamble. The margin for error is razor thin. You absolutely must complete the degree to avoid financial ruin.
That negative $99,000 number for dropouts is shocking because it captures the true cost of failure in a system that's designed to incentivize continuous enrollment above all else.
Precisely. And the danger extends upward into graduate education, showing the systemic fragility isn't limited to just entry-level degrees. The data shows that 43% of master's degree programs also leave students financially worse off.
The same number as sub-baccalaureate.
The exact same number. While professional degrees like law, medicine, and dentistry are extremely lucrative, they boost that median ROI significantly. Master's programs in public service fields like education and social work have particularly low or even negative ROI.
And this is a policy problem, isn't it? Often state policies require workers in these professions to earn a master's just to advance or get a modest pay bump.
That's exactly the contradiction.
But the compensation in those fields just doesn't justify the cost of the degree itself.
Not even close. The median master's degree, despite all the effort and time invested, delivers an ROI of only $50,000. That's barely better than what you can get from some high ROI bachelor's degrees alone. The master's degree market is saturated with credentials that are required for professional gatekeeping, but provide almost no net economic benefit to the student.
So the value proposition is eroding because of high risk, high debt, and this critical variability by major. Now let's pivot from the student's perspective to the institutional response.
Yeah.
Universities aren't just reacting to public opinion. They're facing these crushing, simultaneous external pressures, starting with the long-feared demographic cliff.
And the demographic cliff is no longer a future threat. It is arriving on campus in the 2025-2026 recruiting season.
It's here.
It's here. While undergraduate enrollment has been dipping for a few years, the downward pressure is about to accelerate dramatically. This isn't theoretical. Projections show the number of high school graduates is expected to decline 15% nationally between 2025 and 2029.
A 15% drop. That is a permanent reduction in their target market.
A huge permanent reduction.
And critically, this isn't a national blanket decline. The source data shows a huge regional split, which means the pain is going to be concentrated geographically. This is so vital for schools trying to budget for the future.
That's right. The population drops are concentrating heavily in the Northeast and the Midwest, which historically have high concentrations of these small, tuition-dependent private colleges.
The most vulnerable ones.
The most vulnerable. We project significant declines. For example, 16% fewer students in California and 14% fewer in New York by the next decade. These are huge losses for established institutions in high-cost areas. Conversely, populations are still growing, and the South Texas and Florida are key examples, and some western states like Idaho, Utah, and Nevada.
Idaho, of all places.
Idaho, for instance, is projected to grow its K-12 enrollment by 11%.
So schools in those growing regions, maybe a Vanderbilt in Tennessee or a Stephen F. Austin in Texas, they might be seeing record application numbers right now, buoyed by their brand strength. But they're still going to feel the reality of fewer 18-year-olds eventually.
Exactly. They're just getting a temporary reprieve. Even the most successful schools are hedging against this scarcity, which speaks to the overwhelmingly negative financial outlook across the entire sector.
And that's reflected in the debt ratings.
It is. The three primary debt rating agencies, Moody's, Fitch Ratings, and S&P, have all turned their outlook to negative or deteriorating for the entire higher education sector for 2026.
Now, why should listeners care that a debt rating agency has a negative outlook? What is the practical implication for a university?
It's a major structural warning sign. These agencies cite the combined threats of enrollment pressure, rising operational costs, and this persistent uncertainty over state and federal support. For an institution that's seeking capital financing, say, to build a new science lab or renovate a dormitory, this deflated outlook means harsher credit terms.
So higher interest rates.
Higher interest rates, more stringent requirements, even if general interest rates drop. It just makes necessary infrastructure investments much more expensive, which then feeds back into tuition costs and more financial strain. It's a vicious cycle.
And the competitive pressure from this scarcity is already showing up in one really shocking statistic: the tuition discounting crisis. Institutions are basically fighting over a shrinking pool of traditional students.
And that competition has led to some incredibly aggressive tactics just to get students in the door.
How aggressive.
Tuition discounting for first-time freshmen now exceeds 56% on average across private, nonprofit institutions.
56%.
Yes. Think about what that means in practice. For every dollar of advertised tuition, the school is only collecting 44 cents in net revenue. This just severely limits their operating capital and any kind of budget flexibility.
So if the average private college is only collecting 44 cents on the dollar, who is paying the full dollar to subsidize everyone else?
Well, that's what creates this dangerous cross-subsidy system. The high-need students are receiving heavy aid. That's the discount. So the remaining revenue has to come from students who pay closer to full freight.
Full-pay students.
Typically international students, affluent out-of-state students who are less price-sensitive, or revenue from specific, highly profitable professional master's programs. This system threatens financial stability because the school becomes structurally dependent on attracting that small, highly selective group of full-pay students.
So if the international market shifts, or if a competitor undercuts their niche program,
The whole revenue model can collapse. You have institutions like Endicott College trying to recruit heavily outside New England just to avoid the brutal discounting wars, while others like California Lutheran are already seeing discount rates between 60 and 65%. They are fighting to keep the lights on with what is effectively a 35% revenue stream.
and when institutions can no longer afford to operate on discounted tuition, they enter deep crisis management mode. In the first half of 2025 alone, we saw nearly 70 schools publicly acknowledge financial challenges across 22 states.
And this isn't just about small, fragile colleges anymore. We're seeing large public research institutions cutting over 100 academic programs before the 2026-2027 academic year. This is a clear move toward structural austerity.
Absolutely. The most common immediate cost-cutting tactic is staff layoffs, often starting with non-academic staff or adjunct faculty. But for institutions truly nearing collapse, there are critical, non-obvious warning signs beyond just the immediate deficits.
Right. These are the indicators that faculty, staff, and leadership should be monitoring closely because they signal whether the ship can still be turned around.
Okay, what are those specific indicators that signal impending closure? Let's detail them out so listeners can understand the anatomy of a college collapse.
We can break them down into three key categories, starting with personnel indicators. This is often the first sign of internal chaos.
What does that look like?
You see things like widespread hiring freezes, the complete elimination of annual raises, increased costs for employee health care. Most critically, you see increased administrative turnover. Employees with behind-the-scenes financial knowledge are quietly leaving because they see the writing on the wall.
They're jumping ship.
They're jumping ship. The institution can't compensate qualified employees, or worse, they start filling high-level roles with unqualified internal promotions, which leads to poor decision-making at the very top.
So that's the internal chaos signaling the exterior collapse. What about the physical assets And the balance sheet.
That's where you start to see what is grimly referred to as the fire
The
sale.
fire sale.
This indicator involves actively liquidating or trying to monetize non-cash assets just to desperately cover operational costs. We're talking about selling off donated art collections, valuable real estate, or even selling debt to collection agencies for quick cash.
So it's triage, not therapy.
Exactly. These are reactive attempts to create temporary cash flow, not proactive, strategic investments in revenue generation.
And the most visible, heartbreaking sign of physical decay, the one that directly impacts the student experience.
Deferred maintenance. This is the calculated institutional decision to postpone necessary repairs because there just isn't cash flow to cover them. It's the inability to maintain the physical plant.
So what does that look like on a campus?
It manifests as unclean buildings, break-in equipment going unrepaired for months, waiting until the next fiscal year to fix a critical HVAC system, or even taking entire dormitories or classroom buildings offline because they're too expensive to heat, cool, or maintain safely. It's a slow, visible spiral of decline.
We have a stark case study here that embodies all these points.
Yeah.
The closure of Birmingham Southern College. This wasn't a flash-in-the-pan closure. It was a long, slow-motion disaster despite having roots going all the way back to 1856.
Birmingham Southern is the textbook example of a decades-long decline that was hidden by institutional pride. They ran deficits 16 times over 2 decades.
16 times.
In a previous crisis back in 2010, they cut $10 million in expenses and eliminated 29 faculty positions, but the hemorrhage just continued. At the end, their initial $114 million endowment had slumped to $25 million, and they had accumulated a massive $40 million operating deficit.
And what was their last desperate move?
Their final recruitment tactic was cutting tuition in half, which didn't stop the decline and simply starved them further of net revenue.
And what was the final straw that broke them?
Ultimately, they failed to secure a critical $30 million state loan that would have kept them operating for just one last recruiting cycle. The failure to secure that final lifeline, despite the historical weight of the institution, forced the closure. It just illustrates that even legacy schools are vulnerable when financial mismanagement runs too deep.
As if institutional financial strain weren't enough, we now have massive top-down pressure from new federal accountability mandates epitomized by this new legislation. Let's just call it the Accountability Act. It's fundamentally changing the rules of the game for federal oversight, moving the entire discussion away from inputs like resources and facilities to outputs, to paychecks.
The Accountability Act and its related regulations are shifting the focus entirely onto outcomes, specifically paychecks and pathways. The most significant change is the expansion of the gainful employment rule to degree programs across all colleges, not just the for-profit sector.
And that rule basically says what?
It essentially eliminates federal student aid for any program whose graduates fail to earn more than the median earnings of non-graduates in their state for 2 out of 3 years.
So that is a direct federal mechanism designed to defund programs that don't result in economic mobility. This forces every single institution, regardless of tax status, to become hyper-focused on student economic outcomes and data tracking.
It's a radical, permanent change. For those vulnerable programs, especially those low ROI master's degrees we just discussed, this means potentially losing access to the federal student loan funding pipeline, which is the absolute lifeblood of enrollment. It makes accountability non-negotiable.
And the Accountability Act isn't just targeting undergraduate value. It's aggressively restricting graduate loans, which is going to have massive ripple effects, especially in the healthcare industry.
Indeed. The new policy eliminates the Grad PLS loan program and imposes strict borrowing caps on federal loans for graduate and professional degree programs starting in the 2026-2027 academic year.
What are the caps?
For most graduate programs, the annual cap will be a pretty modest $20,500. For professional degrees like medicine, dentistry, and law, there's a higher annual cap of $50,000.
Wait, if those are the caps, are critical health-related degrees, like nursing, physical therapy, physician assistant studies, are they included in that higher professional degree classification?
Generally, they are not, and that is the critical point that's going to cause real pain.
So these expensive clinical programs are stuck with the lower cap.
They are. These programs will be limited by that $20,500 general graduate cap, and that significantly constrains a student's ability to finance an expensive clinical education, which can easily cost $40,000 to $60,000 per year.
So we are effectively placing severe financial constraints on the pipeline, for crucial, high-demand healthcare workers. That sounds like a recipe for a labor shortage.
It absolutely is. And since women make up the majority of the workforce in nursing, physical therapy, and social work, they're going to be disproportionately affected by this. This contraction in financing is highly likely to reduce enrollment in key healthcare programs, which will in turn widen the existing labor shortages that hospitals and clinics are already facing.
So on one hand, policy is squeezing degrees that don't pay enough, and on the other, it's making expensive but high-demand degrees harder to finance. This leads us directly to the explicit workforce shift the federal government is prioritizing through the new Workforce Pell Grant program.
Yes, this is a very clear policy signal. The Workforce Pell Grant expands Pell eligibility to short-term job training and credential programs that last as little as 8 weeks. This is a direct federal acknowledgement that education for economic mobility does not always require a 4-year degree.
They're putting their money where their mouth is.
They are. The federal focus is actively shifting toward rapid labor market alignment and non-degree credentials, fundamentally challenging the traditional monopoly of higher education over job preparation.
Despite the dire financial and policy headwinds, the demographic cliff, the debt crisis, the regulatory squeeze, the higher education system is not just a passive victim.
Not at all. It's actively adapting, restructuring itself to survive. And the key to understanding its persistence is recognizing that the college system that survives this cliff will look fundamentally different from the one that existed a decade ago. It will be leaner, meaner, and far more career-focused.
And the first sign of this adaptation is who colleges are serving. The traditional high school graduate pool is shrinking, but overall enrollment is actually projected to increase. Where is that growth coming from?
This is the surprising resilience you see in the data. While traditional undergraduate enrollment decreased 15% between 2010 and 2021, total enrollment is projected to increase by 9% between 2021 and 2031.
9%, okay.
And this growth is driven by what institutions now refer to as the new majority. As the demographic cliff deepens, colleges are relying more and more on adult, working, part-time, and returning learners.
And how significant is this shift?
It's very significant. We see that nearly 17% of all undergraduates, that's about 2.6 million students, are aged 30 or older. This non-traditional population represents the new enrollment opportunity. They aren't looking for the 4-year residential experience. They're looking for specific, career-enhancing credentials delivered efficiently.
And serving this new majority demands massive flexibility, which brings us to the permanence of distance education. The pandemic forced colleges online, and that shift, contrary to some early predictions, has become entirely structural.
The data on this is unequivocal. In the fall of 2021, 61% of all undergraduate students were enrolled in at least one distance education course.
61%.
Now, that's down from the 75% peak during the height of the pandemic, but it's still dramatically higher than the 36% participation rate we saw back in 2019.
A huge jump from pre-pandemic levels.
A huge jump. And furthermore, 28% of all undergraduates, about 4.4 million students, were enrolled exclusively in distance education. So for millions of students, online learning is no longer a niche delivery method. It is the new norm for accessing higher education.
And it's interesting to see which institutions are really dominating this space. I understand that private for-profit schools are excelling in exclusive distance learning.
They are leading the trend because their entire operational model is designed for digital delivery and serving working adults. Private for-profit 4-year institutions only enroll 4% of undergraduates overall, but they account for 10% of those enrolled exclusively in distance education.
Wow.
71% of their students are exclusive distance learners. They are highly adept at reaching that working, non-traditional student.
Beyond just recruitment, though, adaptation has to focus on keeping the students they already have, especially since the financial consequences of not finishing are so severe.
Right.
In this new era of scarcity, retention seems to be the defining enrollment metric, replacing simple recruitment figures.
Retention is the ultimate survival tactic because every student who leaves early represents a loss of future tuition revenue and a potential negative ROI statistic for the institution. So institutions are adopting sophisticated, data-driven methods, particularly AI-informed advising and proactive coaching models, to monitor student progress and intervene before they drop out.
So they're trying to get ahead of the problem.
Exactly. But we have to note that the long-term 6-year completion rates still show flattening or declining trends, especially among minority student groups. Getting students to the finish line, that completion status, remains the system's greatest challenge.
And the survival strategy isn't just about how they teach, it's about what they teach. We're seeing a major shift in curricula that's driven entirely by student and employer demand for labor market relevance.
That's right. Student demand is moving rapidly away from standalone humanities majors like English, history, communications. Those are all seeing significant enrollment declines. The future is clearly in interdisciplinary pathways that blend the intellectual rigor of the liberal arts with necessary technical or career-aligned skills.
So the days of a purely academic degree divorced from the labor market are ending.
They're ending for most institutions. The ones that are surviving are embedding applied competencies, digital literacy, and AI fluency directly into their curricula.
And the entire economy is shifting to prioritize skills over degrees, a development that colleges are, maybe reluctantly, embracing through the acceleration of non-degree credentials.
The skills-first economy is here, and it's being pushed aggressively by employers. We see 65% of employers now prioritizing skills-based hiring practices, looking at competencies rather than just a diploma.
Right.
So institutions are responding by accelerating their adoption of platforms that deliver things like micro-credentials and digital badges. These stackable offerings are crucial because they allow students to signal job readiness much faster than waiting 4 years for a diploma.
And this push for career alignment is becoming the central survival strategy. So what are the highest demand areas for 2026 that institutions are now rushing to prioritize?
STEM and healthcare dominate the rankings. The need is so immense that nursing ranks #1 overall due to its high national demand and an exceptionally low unemployment rate of 1.42%. And fields like cybersecurity, data analytics, and health informatics are rising rapidly, representing that key intersection of healthcare and technology.
But it's not just about the hard technical skills, though, is it? We constantly hear about the need for AI-ready skills to future-proof careers, because whatever specific technical skill you learn today might be automated tomorrow.
Absolutely. The skills needed for future careers blend technology with uniquely human capabilities. Complex problem-solving, digital literacy, teamwork, ethics, resilience. As AI automates routine cognitive tasks, institutions need to integrate AI fluency into their programs.
So it's not just teaching them to use the tools.
No, it's equipping them to leverage those tools ethically and strategically to solve bigger, more nuanced problems. That is how the system survives, by offering skills that AI cannot yet replace.
Let's discuss the business model itself. Faced with the demographic cliff and this persistent enrollment pressure, colleges are being forced to dramatically increase revenue diversification beyond traditional tuition. They just can't rely on the full-time 18-year-old anymore.
No. Tuition can no longer be the sole or even the primary revenue driver, especially with that 56% discounting average. So institutions are turning aggressively to new financial tools. One key area is public-private partnerships, or P3s.
So instead of the university borrowing $50 million to build a new dorm and taking on all that debt and maintenance liability,
Right.
they partner with a private developer who builds and manages the dorm. And the university gets a share of the revenue without having the liability on its books.
Precisely. It allows colleges to focus on their core educational missions while external partners handle the financial burdens. This frees up operational cash for academic programs, and we're seeing an expected acceleration in monetizing assets that were previously just operational overhead.
What are some examples of that asset monetization?
Things like monetizing campus energy infrastructure, solar, geothermal by partnering with external energy companies. And the use of esports is emerging as a surprising monetization strategy.
Esports.
Yes. Colleges are building dedicated arenas and programs to generate revenue through sponsorships, merchandise, and digital content, which also attracts a student demographic that's interested in gaming careers or digital media.
Speaking of efficiency, the idea of colleges merging was once extremely rare, carrying a stigma of failure. But now we're seeing an increase in shared services and affiliations.
This trend is accelerating to reduce operational duplication in costly areas like IT, HR, and finance. By sharing services, they can reduce their structural deficits. It's an attempt to maintain branding prestige while achieving the efficiencies of a larger system.
Finally, we have the geopolitical resilience shift. Higher education is a global marketplace, and that landscape is changing dramatically, creating immense complexity for international recruitment.
The traditional global dominance of the US and the UK is stabilizing, or in some cases, declining in the rankings. The latest Time Higher Education World University rankings for 2026 confirm this.
So who is gaining ground on the U.S. and the U.K.?
Asia is rising, led by China, which now has 5 universities in the global top 40, up from 3 just last year. South Korea, Hong Kong, nations in Southeast Asia, they're all showing strong, sustained improvement driven by massive public investment.
And beyond the traditional English-speaking destinations, where are students going now?
We're seeing a significant diversification, especially towards Europe. Nordic countries in particular have seen a 33% increase in interest this year.
Why there?
Audiences are citing perceived stability, safety, and relatively lower tuition costs as major drivers. This shift means the international student recruitment market is widening and becoming hyper-competitive, forcing U.S. and U.K. institutions to offer better incentives to secure that enrollment.
We've covered a massive amount of territory today, looking at the crisis of confidence, the accelerating demographic cliff, the regulatory squeeze of the Accountability Act, and the aggressive adaptation strategies that institutions are deploying to survive. We started with a paradox. Why is college still here?
And the answer is complex. The system is not imploding, but it is definitely fracturing and reforming under intense simultaneous pressure. The college that survives will look fundamentally different. Smaller, highly focused on proving economic ROI, heavily digital, and increasingly geared toward non-traditional students and targeted, career-aligned pathways.
So the days of just offering a degree based on historical inertia or brand recognition are over for most institutions. The competition is too fierce, the debt is too high, and the accountability is too strict.
The key takeaway for you, the learner or the parent, is that the general question, is college worth it, is now basically meaningless. The data confirms the central question is, when is college worth it? And that answer is determined by the 3 variables you choose: the major, the debt load, and the completion status.
If you get all 3 of those right,
If you choose a high ROI major, finance it without burdensome loans, and critically, you finish the degree on time, the numbers still work strongly in your favor. But if you miss on any one of those 3 variables, if you take on heavy debt for a low ROI major and then drop out, the system can leave you financially worse off by tens of thousands of dollars. The risk is now highly personalized.
that economic realignment, forcing institutions to focus purely on labor outcomes, is just undeniable. But as we see financial distress and political pressure forcing universities to connect education directly to specific job outcomes, we have to ask the final, provocative question. If the degree becomes only an employment certificate, what happens to the massive social benefits Americans still largely agree on?
That's the core paradox we started with. Americans overwhelmingly agree that college contributes to creating a more knowledgeable population, increasing tolerance, and driving innovation. We've seen that 76% agree that higher education provides a competitive advantage for the U.S. over other countries.
So if the desperate existential bid for financial survival forces the system to focus exclusively on short-term vocational utility, just cranking out nurses and computer programmers, is the system sacrificing its deeper, crucial societal mission of fostering an informed and cohesive democracy?
It leaves us wondering whether this new, market-aligned model of higher education can still foster the wide-ranging curiosity and the social cohesion that the traditional liberal arts model, however flawed and expensive it was originally designed to champion.
Something for you to mull over as we watch the class of 2026 navigate this new, fractured educational landscape.